Hello, today we're going to take a look at a critical report for software asset management. We're going to look at reporting where we have unlicensed software installed that we've found either based on discovery or other information loaded into our software asset management system. We want to know where in our organization is there software that's being run without a license, and this can be really key to make sure that we're not exposing our company to large damages. So in this example, we're going to use ServiceNow as our software asset management system, but you could do the same with anything that you're using to track licenses, be it spreadsheets or other software management applications or databases. So I'm going to go and I'm going to create a new view against my ServiceNow data source against the software counter details table. This is going to be where we're going to find the details on what software is installed but not entitled. And I'm going to create a view called my asset compliance view. And we're going to make that a chart. So I'm just going to create a simple category chart. And I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to filter on where the type is not entitled, which will tell us only the software that's not entitled to be run, and where we know the model associated to the software counter, and specifically the manufacturer. So we'll say that's not null. And where the counter that's being run tells us how many times it's being used. So greater than 0. So this is going to tell us anywhere that we have an associated software model that's not entitled and we've counted how many times it's used. And we're going to group that based on the manufacturer of that software model. So you see that I have, some that are Autodesk and some that are Citrix. Specifically, rather than counting the counters, we actually want to sum up that time used. So I'm going to grab time used and put that in the sum. Total installations is what I'm going to call that. So now I can see that according to my software asset management system, we have 2,000 or so unlicensed installs of Autodesk, and about 4,000 or so installs of our Citrix softwares. So with just a couple clicks, we've been able to put together this pie chart and see how much is being used, how much is not being used, and it would be very easy for me to further break that down into, for example, break it down by the user's department, so that I can see within this, how much is being how much of these rogue installs are being done by every department. So for example, I can very easily see that IT has 960 of these Autodesk and HR has 94, etc., etc. Now this is a pretty straightforward example where we're just looking at the software counters that are already there and pulling up this report. I want to take this report to the next level. I want to actually look at this in terms of what does this mean for our company? In other words, what's the potential exposure? To do that, I need to actually convert that time used, which is a number of times that it's been installed, into something that we can use for the calculation. So I'm turning this into a list view so that I can do some additional calculation and then report on top of that live calculation. So I'm going to pull in some additional information about the model that's associated to that software counter. So I'm going to pull the model name and the model's manufacturer. And I'm also going to pull a field called price that's associated to this. And I'm going to remove a couple additional fields. So now I can see I can see how many times each one of these software is used, and then I can also see for that software model, what's that associated price. So we're walking those relationships out to another table that has that price, and I also know how many times we discovered it in the environment. So now what I'm going to do is create a field called exposure that's going to take the number of times we found that rogue software and multiply it by that cost that we discovered. So now for each one of these counter rows, we discover, we used AutoCAD inappropriately 65 times. Each one costs $1,000, and that's $65,000 worth of exposure. Now I can take this table with whatever, modifications or changes that we've made, and I can go to New, File, Created Composite View on top of this view. And we're going to call this My Asset Exposure in US dollars. So now I'm building a live report on top of this altered table that I can use to do the same kind of reporting. So I'm going to again group this by the manufacturer. I'm going to relabel that just manufacturer. And then instead of counting how many rows there are, I'm going to sum up this new exposure field. And just as a point of contrast, I'll also show you that sum of times used that we had before. The reason I'm going to show you this is because before we saw that Autodesk was being used 2,555 times. And now we can see that adds up to an exposure of 2.5 million. Whereas even though we're using Citrix a lot more, the exposure to the company is actually a lot less because it's cheaper software. That way, if I want to focus on what's going to have the biggest effect for my company in terms of reducing exposure, I actually want to focus on the Autodesk, which is good because spending time pulling back less licenses will actually save my company more money. Now, what's great about this input view is that I can add or remove any information I want and be able to leverage that in the report I'm building. So for example, I can add in all of that information about the user, so who the user is, and then what department and location, and we'll even have the country of the location. And all of that will be available in the report. We can also refer to tables that are in other data sources. So in the example, I put together from walking onto a related table this software model cost. But let's say, for example, that we didn't actually have that available. We needed to pull that in from another source. Let's suppose I have a spreadsheet that I've created called pricing that I've uploaded to Explore Analytics that just maps each model to a price. Instead of dot walking that relationship, I can, in a formula, use a really powerful formula. This formula is going to look up to a table called pricing in our Explore data source, and it's going to match the model that's in my current report against the model field that's in that new spreadsheet and pull me back the price. And we will call this referenced cost. So now in that exposure calculation that we created before, instead of this, the one that's in this data source, I'm going to pull that referenced cost. And now the calculation is actually going live against my ServiceNow data source and the spreadsheet that we saw before. And you'll notice that I made all of those changes to that input view and I didn't actually have any impact or break the view that I was working with. I can very easily go in, make live changes, even add in other sources of data like we just did, and wander out with the same report. Now the other thing I can do, because I added in that user information, is I can define a drill down path. What a drill down path allows you to do is give the user an option to be able to drill down into more information about what they're looking at. So for example, if I pull in those user fields as a drill down path, now when I'm viewing this report and I click, not only can I go to that list of the details, but I can say, okay, for Autodesk, show it to me by department. So now you'll see it's added the filter where we're looking just at the Autodesk. And I can see, okay, there's $960,000 of exposure within the IT department. We'll show that to me by country. So now for IT, I'm looking, and Brazil is less than the United States, so I could drill into the United States. And within the United States, I can see that San Isidro, California, has a large amount of this. And I can see which users within San Isidro are driving that cost. So you can see that you can make this report that's live, that's against multiple sources of data, that's using calculations to put things in business terms, and gives you the full interactivity to drill down as far as you need. Now, all of this that we've been showing has been in a fairly standard bar chart, but again, all of this information we could represent to the user however you want to do it. So for example, I could look at this geographically, so by area, and use that country field so that I can very easily see where in the world are we most exposed. Clearly in the United States. Maybe we need to look at how that part of our organization is operating and why that was able to become such a large issue. Or I could look at it within the geography, still by country, but I could create a pie chart that shows us by exposure, and within that, the manufacturer. Again, all of this is something that you have the capability to do, and all of the information you need will be at your fingertips. Thanks for joining us. We've just scratched the surface of the great asset management and software asset management reports you can get. If you want to try this against your own source of data, you can try a free 30-day evaluation of Explore Analytics and hook it up to your software asset management systems, databases, or spreadsheets.